She slammed the door in my face and turned off the porch light. "You can sleep in your truck if you like," she said, her voice flat as stone. The rain had already soaked through my coat, but the cold didn't sting half as much as her words did. That was my house. I built it with my own hands. I buried my wife under the tree in that yard. And now, my daughter, my only child, had shut me out like I was nothing. She didn't know what I'd done just hours before. By morning, the house wouldn't be hers anymore. Before we continue, I'd love to know, where are you watching from today? Comment below. It wasn't always like this. In fact, if you had told me 10 years ago that Emily would one day lock me out of my own home, I would have laughed it off and called you a fool. She was my whole world after Marjorie passed. My wife died young, far too young, leaving me with a 6-year-old girl in a house that still smelled like fresh paint and wedding candles. Emily was my shadow in those early years. I'd take her with me to the hardware store, balance her on my shoulders while I worked on the gutters, even let her hold the flashlight while I changed the oil on the old truck. She called it our garage time, and every Saturday, like clockwork, we'd be in there listening to the radio, telling silly stories, or just sitting in the quiet. She used to draw pictures of our house with little hearts all around it. Once she taped one to the fridge that said, "Daddy's Castle." I worked hard, sometimes too hard. I was a carpenter by trade, and I took every job I could to keep food on the table and clothes on her back. I'd come home late with splinters in my palms and sawdust in my hair, and she'd always be waiting up, sitting on the couch with a blanket around her and a mug of warm milk she tried to make by herself. We didn't have much, but we had each other. That was enough. Marjorie's absence was like a shadow in our lives, but we honored her every Sunday by visiting her grave. Emily would pick wildflowers from the backyard, tie them with rubber bands, and lay them down gently, whispering secrets to the headstone like it was her private journal. I never told her I could hear every word. When Emily got older, things stayed sweet, at least for a while. She was a smart girl, full of fire and ambition. She wanted to be a teacher, said she loved the way books could teach without yelling. I saved every extra dime for her college fund. Skipped vacations, canceled cable, ate peanut butter sandwiches for weeks when work was slow. And when she finally got her acceptance letter, I cried like a child and told her, "Go build your world, baby. I've built mine already." She was gone for 4 years. Came back with a degree, a fiancé, and a sharper edge to her voice. I didn't think much of it at the time. I figured that's just what growing up does to people. She asked if they could move in for a little while to save money. Of course, I said yes. That house was her home, same as mine. I even gave them the master bedroom. Marjorie and I had shared it for 25 years, but I figured it was the decent thing to do. I moved into the smaller room at the back of the house. Didn't mind. The bed still squeaked the same, and the window still looked out onto the oak tree where I'd carved M+E when Emily was born. At first, it felt nice having company again. Her husband, Derek, was polite. Quiet. He offered to mow the lawn, fixed the porch light once. I thought maybe it would be a new chapter for all of us. But slowly, something shifted. Emily started calling me Ed around the house, never Dad. I'd laugh it off, thinking it was a joke, but she never corrected herself. Derek started acting more like the owner of the place than a guest. Rearranged the living room without asking. Took down the photos of Marjorie and replaced them with abstract art I didn't understand. Still, I bit my tongue. They were young, figuring life out. I didn't want to be the grumpy old man who couldn't adapt. I told myself the important part was that we were still under the same roof. That maybe, in some quiet way, this was still Daddy's castle. We'd sit down for dinner sometimes, just like old times. I'd make meatloaf the way Marjorie used to, and for a while, Emily would smile and ask for seconds. But eventually, she'd take her plate to the couch instead, barely mumbling a thank you. Derek never looked up from his phone. One night, I overheard her telling him, he's just stuck in the past. We'll have our own place soon. It stung, but I still didn't say anything. Instead, I tried to be useful. Fixed the leaky sink. Painted the guest room. Installed new shelves in their closet. I thought if I kept contributing, maybe they'd remember what we had, what I gave. What I lost to make this house a home. I even gave Emily her mother's jewelry box on her wedding day. It still had the dried rose inside from Marjorie's bridal bouquet. She opened it with barely a glance, said, "Thanks, Ed," and passed it to a bridesmaid. That one stuck with me for a long time. Still, I kept telling myself, this is just a phase. She'll come around. She always does. But deep down, something in me knew. The girl who once taped drawings to the fridge and warmed up milk for her tired old dad was slipping away. And the silence between us was getting louder by the day. It started small. So small I almost didn't notice. A sigh when I walked into the room. A delayed, "good morning," that didn't sound like it meant anything. I'd always believed the worst kind of heartbreak didn't come like a hammer, but like water wearing down stone. Little by little. The first real crack came during breakfast. I'd made my usual Saturday spread, eggs, toast, and bacon. Emily used to love it as a kid. She'd sneak into the kitchen and steal bacon right out of the pan, laughing. That morning, I set the table, even folded napkins, hoping we could eat like a family. She came downstairs, gave it one glance, and said, "Ugh. I'm trying to cut down on grease, Ed." Then she poured herself a protein shake and walked out. Ed. She called me Ed again. Not Dad. Not even old man, like she jokingly used to say in college. Just Ed. Like I was the tenant and she was the landlord. I wanted to say something, but I just nodded and sipped my coffee. Then there was the matter of the thermostat. I like the house a little cooler, it helps my joints and keeps the bills down. But one evening, I came home from a walk to find it cranked to 78. I turned it down. An hour later, it was right back up. I left a note on the fridge, just asking if we could find a middle ground. The next morning, it was crumpled in the trash. That was the first time I sat on the porch a little longer than usual. Just staring at the yard, the tree, the driveway. I found myself wondering, am I a guest in my own house now? Derek didn't help. He was polite at first, but over time, the veneer wore thin. He started correcting me at the dinner table. "Actually, Ed, that's not how mortgages work. Or, you don't really get how the stock market moves these days." Always with a smirk like he was teaching a child. One night, I was in the garage fixing up a busted kitchen drawer when I overheard them through the window. "Emily, he doesn't do anything all day. Just sits around tinkering. Derek, you said he'd be in Florida by now. Didn't he have a retirement plan or something? Emily, we'll figure it out. Just be patient." I set the drawer down and turned off the light. Sat there in the dark for a while. I'd been patient all my life. From then on, I started noticing everything. Derek parked in my old spot in the driveway without asking. My recliner was moved to the basement. My wedding photo was taken off the hallway wall and replaced with some modern print of a red circle. When I asked about it, Emily just shrugged. "We're trying to create a more neutral vibe." Neutral. That word stuck in my throat. One Sunday, I asked if we could go visit Marjorie's grave. We used to go every month, rain or shine. Emily hesitated. "I'm really busy right now. Work's been insane." I nodded, told her it was fine. Drove out alone. Left flowers. Sat there for an hour just talking to the stone. Told Marjorie about the way the house felt colder, even with the heat on. That night, Emily brought up, downsizing. You could sell the house, you know. Move somewhere smaller. Warmer. It's too much for you, Ed. Too much. That house was all I had left of the life I built. I'm fine here, I said. She gave a tight smile. You sure? Florida sounds nice. And we could use the space, you know, if we start a family. There it was. The unspoken plan, laid bare just enough to sting. I tried to reclaim my space. Started working in the garage again. Fixed up an old chair. Put Marjorie's rose bush back in the soil by the porch. It had died the year she passed, and I hadn't had the heart to try again until now. When Emily saw it, she frowned. That doesn't go with the landscaping plan. I looked at her, really looked. And for a brief moment, I saw a stranger standing where my daughter used to be. I think your mother would have liked it, I said quietly. She didn't respond. Just turned and walked back inside. The worst part was how quickly I began second-guessing myself. Was I being too sensitive? Was this just how families evolve? I asked my friend Howard, he lives down the street, same age as me, lost his wife too. He told me, you're not crazy. You're just not blind. One evening, I tried talking to Emily again. I asked if we could have a family dinner, just the two of us. No phones, no Derek. She sighed and said, I'm not 10 anymore, Ed. We don't need to pretend. That hit hard. Pretend? Was that what she thought those years were? Pretend? That night, I went out to the garage and opened the old cedar chest where I kept Marjorie's letters. I read one where she'd written, no matter how tall Emily grows, she'll always need her father to remind her who she is. I closed the letter, ran my fingers over the creases. And that's when I realized, I hadn't failed as a father. She'd just stopped listening. It was a Sunday evening. Emily had invited some of her friends over, couples from work, a few people from Derek's gym, and even some neighbors I hadn't met yet. I hadn't been told ahead of time. I found out when I came back from my usual grocery run and saw extra cars lining the driveway, laughter spilling from the backyard, and music playing loud enough to rattle the porch windows. I walked in carrying a bag of apples and bread. Nobody noticed. No one even turned their head. Emily spotted me from across the kitchen and waved lazily like I was the mailman. Oh hey, Ed. Just set those down anywhere. No smile. No warmth. I stood there for a second, apples heavy in my hand. I looked around, every face unfamiliar, young, shiny, dressed like they were posing for magazine photos. I didn't see a single picture of Marjorie or Emily as a child anywhere on the walls. Even the old clock I'd built from reclaimed barn wood was gone. Replaced with some digital screen that blinked temperature and weather updates. One of the guests, a man with a manicured beard and tight polo, looked at me and said, "Hey man, you the landlord?" Before I could answer, Emily chimed in, No, he's just living with us for now. My dad's between places. Between places. It took a moment for that to land. My throat clenched. I could feel it in my spine, something irreversible had just happened. A switch flipped. The girl I raised, the one who once cried in my arms because her goldfish died, was now erasing me in front of strangers. Rewriting the story of this house. Of my life. I said nothing. Just placed the bag on the counter and backed out of the room like a ghost. I went out to the back deck. The rain had stopped, and the sky was doing that soft orange fade into dusk. I stood there for a while, listening to the hum of voices inside, the occasional burst of laughter. No one came out to check on me. Not even Emily. Later that evening, I came back in to grab my plate. They were all gathered around the table, my table, and I noticed they'd moved the leaf to make more room. A man I'd never seen before was sitting in my chair. The one Marjorie had given me for Father's Day 15 years ago. It still had the initials she'd carved into the armrest, M+E. I stood there, frozen, waiting for someone to notice. They didn't. I cleared my throat gently. Emily turned. "Can I help you with something, Ed?" There it was again. Ed. Not Dad. Not even Father. I was just going to grab a plate. She looked at Derek, then back at me. "Oh," she said, without moving. "We didn't make extra. Thought you were out tonight." The room went silent for a moment, and then someone awkwardly passed a salad bowl. I shook my head. "Don't worry about it." And I walked away. Back to the garage. That night, I didn't eat. I sat on the old workbench, stared at my calloused hands, and tried to remember the last time I felt like I belonged in that house. It had been years, I realized. I'd just been too stubborn to admit it. I thought back to when Emily was 13 and broke her arm falling off her bike. She cried and cried, and I carried her in my arms all the way down the block to the truck. She squeezed my shirt the whole ride to the hospital. She never let go. That was the last time she needed me. Or maybe, the last time she showed it. The next morning, I found something that sealed it all. I walked into the backyard to water the rose bush I had planted for Marjorie, the same one Emily had called clutter. But it was gone. Dug up. Uprooted. The soil still fresh, the shovel marks clear. A new fire pit sat in its place. I walked inside, voice trembling, and asked, "What happened to the rose bush?" Emily didn't even look up from her phone. "It didn't match the patio design," she said flatly. "Derek had it removed yesterday." I stared at her for a long time. My voice cracked when I replied. "That bush was for your mother." She shrugged. "You still have the memory, Ed." And that was it. No apology. No regret. Just a shrug. That night, I didn't sleep in the house. I grabbed an old quilt, my notebook, and a few things from my safe. I slept in the garage. Marjorie's photo in my hand. My chest felt like it was caving in, but somewhere under all that pain, something hardened. It wasn't just that she didn't respect me anymore. It was that she no longer saw me at all. And that was the deepest cut. It was around 2 a.m. when I first heard them. I had gotten used to sleeping in the garage. There was a small cot I'd set up years ago for emergencies, and I made do with it. The house, my house, didn't feel like mine anymore. But that garage? That space still held my fingerprints. My tools, my old jackets, the cedar chest with Marjorie's letters. It was the only place they hadn't touched yet. That night, I couldn't sleep. The wind had picked up, and something inside me was restless. I sat up on the cot, pulled the quilt around my shoulders, and stared at the ceiling. Then I heard voices, muffled, but sharp. Emily and Derek. Upstairs. Arguing. I moved quietly toward the corner of the garage that sat below the kitchen window. The pane was cracked slightly, just enough to carry the sound. "Derek, you said he'd be in a home by now." "Emily, it's not that easy. He's stubborn. Keeps talking like he's never leaving." "Derek, we need to finish the refinancing before the baby, Em. The bank needs both our names on the title." "Emily, he still thinks the house is his. Legally it is, but..." Silence. Then Derek again, "He's old. He'll slip. They always do." A few missed pills. A little confusion. "It won't take much to make a case." Emily said nothing. I backed away from the window slowly, my heartbeat pounding in my ears. My hands were shaking. I sat back down on the cot and stared into the dark. So that was it. They weren't just being cruel. They weren't just growing distant. They had a plan. And that plan was to erase me, one legal form, one gaslit moment at a time. The next morning, I waited until they left for work. I went inside and walked through the house slowly, deliberately. I opened drawers, cabinets. I wasn't snooping, I was verifying. In the office drawer, I found them. Real estate brochures. 4 of them. 2 with notes in Emily's handwriting. One of them circled a phrase, "Best ROI in your zip code." On the kitchen counter, a retirement home flyer. Serene Pines, where comfort meets care. It had a sticky note on it that said, "Call next week." I stood there for a long time. The sunlight streamed through the window like everything was still normal. But my knees felt weak. My ears rang. They were going to sell the house. My house. They were going to put me in a home. The kind of place where they medicate you until you forget your name. I've seen those places. Visited old friends who ended up there. You walk in with a name and walk out with a wristband and a plastic cup of pills. I went back to the garage and pulled out the cedar chest. Marjorie's letters were still inside. I hadn't read most of them since the year she passed. I opened the top one, written a month after Emily was born. "Promise me, Ed, you'll never let her grow up without knowing where she came from. Remind her what this house was built on. Remind her who we were." I clutched the letter against my chest and felt my eyes fill. I tried to remember the last time Emily and I had laughed. Really laughed. Maybe it was the time I taught her to drive. She'd scraped the mailbox and burst into tears, and I'd laughed so hard I nearly choked. I told her it was just metal. What mattered was her heart. Where had that girl gone? Had I failed to protect her from the world? Or had the world shown her something that made her choose convenience over conscience? That night, I didn't cry. I made a list. A quiet list. Names, numbers, facts. I called an old friend, Raymond, who worked in real estate. He still owed me a favor from when I helped him rebuild his porch after a storm. I asked him one question: if I wanted to sell my house fast, with no drama, could you help me? He didn't hesitate. Absolutely. Then I called another friend, Thomas, a lawyer who'd done estate work for my brother's will. We met the next day over coffee. I laid it all out, the property, the title, the living arrangements, the retirement home flyers, everything. Thomas leaned back and sighed. "Ed, you've got every legal right. You own that house outright. No liens. If they're trying to push you out, you've got options." "I want to change my will," I said. He blinked. "Okay. Want to talk about who gets what?" I nodded. "Everything goes to charity. Specifically, the Veterans Housing Program downtown." "What about Emily? If she contests it, the clause triggers. They get nothing." He paused. "That's extreme." I looked him in the eye. "So is locking your father outside and planning his eviction." He didn't argue. I signed the preliminary paperwork that evening. When I left Thomas's office, I felt something strange. Not peace, exactly. But clarity. It was like I could breathe again. For the first time in years, I was seeing clearly, not just who Emily had become, but who I was still allowed to be. I wasn't powerless. I wasn't a burden. I was a man who had built something. And I still had the power to decide what happened to it. Speech balloon: have you ever felt betrayed by your own family? Let us know in the comments. A few days later, I decided it was time to test the waters. Emily was in the kitchen, chopping vegetables for some new, clean recipe she was following. Derek was sitting at the bar, scrolling through his phone. The air in the room was stale, like everyone was waiting for someone else to speak first. I stepped in and cleared my throat. "Can we talk?" Emily didn't look up. About what? I overheard you two the other night, I said, my voice steady. Talking about putting me in a home. About refinancing the house. That got her attention. She stopped chopping, stiffened. Derek looked up, surprised but not ashamed. Emily turned slowly. You were eavesdropping? I tilted my head. I live here. The walls aren't that thick. She crossed her arms. Look, Dad. Ed, whatever. You've been difficult lately. You're not adjusting well. Derek and I are trying to plan a future here. We need space. Stability. And honestly, this setup, it's not working. Not working, I repeated. You sleep in the garage. You don't join us for dinner. You glare at Derek like he's the enemy. I mean, what do you expect us to do? I looked at Derek. He just smirked like he was watching a rerun he'd seen before. I kept my voice calm. So your solution was to get rid of me? Emily glanced down, her voice dropping. It's not like that. We were just considering options. You were considering removing me from my home. She opened her mouth, then closed it. The silence stretched. Then she said the most telling thing of all. You don't need a whole house. You've had your time. That's when I knew there was no turning back. They weren't just misguided. They felt entitled. As if the house, my life's work, was some temporary arrangement they were waiting to inherit. And I was just lingering too long on the stage. I didn't argue. I didn't raise my voice. I simply walked back out, shut the door behind me, and wrote 3 words in my notebook: it's time now. Later that week, I had coffee with Mrs. Penner from next door. She's in her 70s, widowed, nosy in the kindest way. She'd seen Emily and Derek come and go and asked gently, "How are things at home, Ed?" I gave her a tight smile. Changing. She leaned in. You know, you're not the first to go through this. Kids think because we're quiet, we're weak. But quiet doesn't mean stupid. I liked that. Quiet doesn't mean stupid. When I returned home that afternoon, Derek was in the garage. My garage. He had one of my tools, my grandfather's old hammer, and was using it to hang a shelf for their home gym. Hey, I said firmly. Did you ask before touching that? He turned, half amused. What? It was just lying there. That hammer was my grandfather's. You don't touch it without asking. Derek raised his hands mockingly. All right, man. Relax. Didn't think it was such a big deal. But then he muttered, just under his breath, maybe it's time someone else used the tools around here. He didn't know it, but he just handed me the final nail in the coffin. That evening, I called Raymond again. List it, I said. He didn't need clarification. You sure? Yes. I'm done waiting. We agreed on a private sale, no signs, no public listing, just a clean transfer to a cash buyer he trusted. Someone looking for a second home out of state. The price was generous, and most importantly, the process would be quiet. I also revisited Thomas, my lawyer, to finalize the will update. As I signed the last page, he looked at me and said, "You all right, Ed?" I nodded. I've never been more certain of anything. Still, certainty doesn't mean it didn't hurt. That night, I walked through every room of the house. The hallway where Emily used to run in her sock feet. The fireplace mantel where Marjorie hung our stockings every year. The back porch where I'd first kissed my wife under a rainstorm. I touched the doorknobs, the worn banister, the window frames I'd sanded by hand. All of it still smelled faintly of the past. But none of it felt like mine anymore. I sat in the dining room alone, under the old chandelier, and lit one candle. Then I whispered to Marjorie. I'm sorry. I tried. I really tried. But in my gut, I knew she'd understand. She would have been the first to say it. Respect isn't something you owe to blood, it's something you earn with love. And love? That had gone cold a long time ago. The lawyer's office smelled like lemon polish and old paper. A place where people came to tie up loose ends, make things official, and often do things they never thought they'd do. Thomas sat across from me, pen in hand, his eyes scanning the pages I'd requested he draft. Are you sure about the charity clause? He asked. It's aggressive. If Emily contests this, she gets nothing. It all goes to the Veterans Housing Fund. I nodded. That's the point. He didn't argue. He'd known me long enough to recognize when my mind was set. As he slid the final documents across the table, I looked down at the line where her name had been. Emily Rose Halstead. There it was, crossed out in ink. It felt like signing a death certificate. But not hers, mine. The death of who I thought I was to her. The death of our bond. You don't need to leave her anything? Thomas asked softly. I paused. She's already taken everything I could give her. My time. My love. My trust. She spent all of it. He handed me the pen. I held it for a long moment before putting it to paper. With one stroke, I cut the rope that had been slowly strangling me. After signing, Thomas reached into his desk and pulled out a small fireproof envelope. This copy's yours. I'll file the rest. I tucked it into my coat pocket and stood up. Do you want me to notify her? He asked. No. She'll find out in time. The way she found out about everything else in this house, when it's already done. He nodded, and I walked out into the cold wind with my coat flapping open and my hands feeling lighter than they had in years. I didn't go home right away. I drove out to the lake. Marjorie loved that place. She used to pack a lunch and bring a thermos of tea, and we'd sit on the hood of the truck just watching the ducks glide across the water like it was their kingdom. I sat on that same hood, opened my thermos, and poured myself a cup of cheap coffee. Held it close to my face and whispered, "It's done, love." I finally let go. There was no reply, of course. But the wind shifted slightly, and I let myself believe, just for a moment, that she heard me. The next morning, I began moving the pieces into place. I packed a small duffel bag with essentials, just the things I'd need to leave quickly if I had to. I gathered the deed, the finalized will, and the sale agreement from Raymond, now nearly complete. Just one more signature and the house would no longer be mine. Or theirs. I walked through the house with a different kind of eye now. Not one searching for peace or reconciliation. But one looking at the truth. Emily and Derek treated me like a leftover. Like something to discard once the expiration date passed. They didn't see the man who had raised Emily through nights of fever and fear. The man who taught her how to ride a bike, stood in the rain at every soccer game, and built a treehouse she used twice but told her friends she loved. They saw someone in the way. That afternoon, I stood at the safe and pulled out the old envelope Marjorie had left me years ago, marked, "For when you can't take it anymore." Inside was a single page in her handwriting. "Don't let them hollow you out, Ed. You're more than what they take from you. You're what you choose to give, and what you choose to keep." She'd written it when Emily was just 12. Back then, it made no sense. Now it was everything. That night, I went into the garage and wrapped the hammer, the one Derek had used without asking, in cloth. I placed it into a box with a note, "This belonged to a man who built, not took." Then I locked the garage for the last time. Emily must have sensed something. At dinner, she asked, "You all right?" Her tone was less sharp than usual. I smiled. "I'm fine." And I was. I ate quietly. Watched them talk about nursery colors and Derek's promotion. Emily barely looked my way. But that was okay. I had already left in every way that mattered. The next day, I met Raymond at the notary's office. The buyer was ready. Payment in escrow. No delays. No inspections. He was out of state, wanted it fast, and paid in full. I signed. My name on the paper meant something different now. Not ownership. Freedom. I left the office and sat in my truck for a while, watching people walk by. Parents with strollers. Couples arguing about coffee orders. Teenagers laughing like nothing in the world could ever hurt them. I had been all of those people. And now I was someone else entirely. Someone with nothing left to give to people who only knew how to take. The day everything snapped was supposed to be ordinary. That's how most endings arrive, not with fireworks, but with a quiet crack that finally breaks the beam. I came home from the hardware store, where I'd picked up a few last things. New locks, a notepad, and a copy of the house key for Raymond. I stepped inside and noticed immediately that something was wrong. My room, if you could still call it that, was wide open. Boxes stacked neatly in the hallway. The bed stripped, drawers emptied. On top of one box was a note in Emily's handwriting. We're turning this into the nursery. Please move your things to the garage permanently. Thanks for understanding. No knock. No conversation. No eye contact. Just a note. A command. I stood there for a long time, staring at the bed frame I'd built with my own hands 30 years ago. Marjorie and I had made Emily in that bed. We used to lie there on Sunday mornings, listening to the birds in the oak tree outside the window. Now it was just another room they were taking over. I walked to the garage, where they'd already shoved my belongings. My clothes, my books, even the small box with Marjorie's wedding ring inside. All of it sitting like junk in a corner of a space that used to be mine. I didn't cry. I didn't yell. I just sat on the bench, staring at the wall. The rage I thought would boil over never came. Just a deep, low coldness. The kind that fills your bones when you finally stop pretending. That night, it rained. Hard. I got up to use the bathroom inside the house. As I reached for the back door, I found it locked. Deadbolt. From the inside. I knocked gently. No answer. Knocked again. Then, through the thin crack of the curtain, I saw her face. Emily. She looked at me for a second. Then reached up and flicked off the porch light. I stood there in the dark, soaked in rain, my hand still raised. It was the second time she'd locked me out. But this time, I had no more illusions. I returned to the garage, peeled off my wet coat, and sat down at my workbench. There, I opened the fireproof envelope with the final deed transfer from Raymond. The buyer had signed. It was done. Tomorrow, the house would legally belong to someone else. And I would never again have to knock on a door in a home I built. I slept on the cot one last time, Marjorie's photo beside me. I whispered to her, I did what I could, love. But I'm not letting them erase me. The next morning, I woke early. The rain had stopped, but the clouds hung low and heavy. I put on my coat, grabbed my duffel, and walked out into the driveway just as a sleek black sedan pulled up. Raymond stepped out, holding the final paperwork. Behind him, another car arrived, a moving crew. I looked at my watch. 7:32 a.m. Right on time. Emily came outside in her robe, hair messy, confusion written all over her face. What's going on? She asked. Raymond nodded politely. Good morning. We're here to finalize the turnover. Property transfer is complete. She blinked. What are you talking about? I stepped forward, handed her a copy of the contract. I sold the house. Derek came out behind her, shirtless, rubbing his eyes. Sold? What the hell do you mean, sold? Emily's voice cracked. You didn't even tell us? No, I said calmly. Just like you didn't tell me when you boxed up my room. Or locked the doors. Or planned to put me away. She stared at the papers, lips trembling. You can't do this. This is my home. No, Emily, I said, my voice low. This was my home. And you were welcome to share it, until you decided I didn't belong. The moving crew began unloading boxes for the new owner, an older woman from out of state, who waved kindly as she stepped out of her car. Emily turned to me, panic in her voice. Where are we supposed to go? I imagine you'll figure it out, I said. You're both resourceful people. After all, you had plans. Just not ones that included me. She stepped forward, eyes wet. Dad, wait, please. Can we just talk about this? I looked her in the eyes. No. That was the only word I had left for her. Derek muttered something under his breath and stormed back inside. I turned and walked to my truck. Didn't look back. Didn't need to. Behind me, I heard her voice rise, half sob, half disbelief, as the realization settled in. I had taken back what was mine. And now, she was the one left out in the cold. 2 days later, there was a birthday party at the community center. Mrs. Penner had invited me. She said it was her grandson's 5th, and she wanted a good man at the grill. I didn't want to go at first, but I figured I could use some noise, some laughter that wasn't forced. The center was just a few blocks away, one of those old halls with folding chairs, sheet cakes, and string lights that blink unevenly. The kind of place where families gather and history gets passed over paper plates. I showed up early. Helped tie balloons. Lit the coals. Smiled as the kids ran circles around the tables. And then, around noon, Emily showed up. Uninvited. She wore a cardigan too thin for the weather and carried a manila envelope in her hands like it weighed 100 pounds. Her eyes locked onto mine. And I knew what was coming. She walked slowly across the room, ignoring the stares. I could feel the heat from the grill, my hand tightening around the spatula. Dad, she said. I didn't speak. I need to talk to you. Mrs. Penner watched us closely from across the buffet table. A few other neighbors noticed too. Word had gotten around quickly after the sale. People knew. Some pitied her. Others looked at her with quiet judgment. Emily opened the envelope and pulled out a stack of papers. I've spoken to a lawyer, she said, her voice low. We're contesting the sale. You didn't give us notice. We were residents, tenants, technically. I nodded slowly. You never paid rent. She flinched. Still, we lived there. You lived there, I said evenly, after I let you. You called me a guest in my own house, Emily. Then you locked me out of it. People nearby fell silent. Even the children slowed their pace. She looked down. I didn't mean. Yes, you did, I said. You meant every word. You meant every slammed door, every name you didn't call me, every meal you never cooked, every time you let him speak for you. You meant it when you dug up your mother's rose bush. When you boxed up my room. When you signed up for open houses behind my back. Her eyes welled. Dad, please. I kept going. You used me. You used the house. You wanted the bricks but not the man who built them. You let that man talk about putting me in a home. She looked shaken now. The envelope trembled in her hands. I'm sorry, she whispered. It was the first honest thing I'd heard from her in years. But it wasn't enough. You sold something, Emily. Not the house. Not the furniture. You sold your place in my heart. And the price was convenience. She reached out, almost like she wanted to touch my arm, but stopped short. I didn't realize how far it had gone. No, I said. You just didn't think I'd do anything about it. And then I did something I never thought I'd do. I pulled out a copy of the revised will. Held it up. This is what you would have inherited. This is what your mother and I built. But now, it goes to veterans who don't have a roof. Who would sleep in the mud before they disrespect the hand that offered it to them. Gasps. Whispers. Someone dropped a plastic cup. I placed the papers on the table next to the hot dogs. You may contest it, I said. But if you do, everything goes to charity. That's the clause. Every cent. Her mouth opened and closed like she was trying to breathe underwater. I'm not doing this to hurt you, I added. I'm doing it because I love myself enough to stop letting you hurt me. She finally spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. Where do I go now? That's not my concern anymore, I replied. You made your choices. Then I turned and walked back to the grill. A little boy ran up to ask for a hot dog with extra ketchup. I handed him two. Behind me, Emily stood still for a long time before walking out of the hall, papers clutched in her hand, shoulders shaking. She didn't look back. Neither did I. Speech balloon brain, do you think the father made the right choice? Comment and don't forget to like and subscribe for more true life stories. The silence afterward wasn't peaceful. Not at first. It settled over me like ash, not snow, quiet, but suffocating. You don't expect the end of a family bond to sound like anything, but it does. It echoes. In the empty chair across from you at breakfast. In the unused mug in the cupboard. In the creak of the floorboard outside the door you don't open anymore. For days after the confrontation, I didn't hear a word from Emily. No calls. No letters. Not even an angry voicemail. At first, I thought she'd show up again, maybe at the lake, maybe at the cemetery where her mother rested. But nothing. It was like she'd vanished, or maybe, I had. I spent those days in the small cabin I rented on the outskirts of town. It was modest, just one bedroom, a wood-burning stove, and a screened porch that overlooked a grove of trees. The landlord was a retired Army medic who charged me next to nothing after I told him I was donating my house proceeds to the Veterans Housing Project. Said, "You're good people, Ed, world needs more of that." Most days, I walked. I'd start early, before the sun burned off the mist. The trails nearby were mostly empty that time of day, save for the occasional jogger or a squirrel darting across the path. I found something calming in the rhythm of my steps. The crunch of leaves. The wind brushing through the trees. The town buzzed, of course. Word got around. Mrs. Penner stopped by once with a pie she claimed she overbaked accidentally. She didn't ask questions. Just said, "You know, some of us think you did the right thing. Not many have the spine for it. Others weren't so kind." A woman at the grocery store gave me a long, cold look and muttered, "Family's still family, no matter what." I didn't argue. I just tipped my hat and kept walking. But the hardest part wasn't their opinions. It was sitting with my own. One evening, I sat on the porch with Marjorie's photo in my hand and asked the question that had been clawing at my insides. Did I go too far? I waited, half hoping the wind would answer. That I'd hear her voice in the rustling branches or feel her hand on my shoulder. But there was only stillness. And the steady ache of memory. I thought back to when Emily was 9 and had run away from home after a fight about homework. I found her 2 blocks away at the park, sitting on the swing with her knees pulled up to her chest. I sat down next to her, said nothing for a long time. Finally, she whispered, "I thought you wouldn't come." I told her, "I'll always come. No matter how mad we are." And now? Now I wasn't so sure. She hadn't said sorry at the party. Not really. Not in the way a child apologizes when they know they've crossed a line that can't be uncrossed. It was more panic than remorse. Still, the silence between us was no longer anger. It had shifted into something softer. Sadder. Lonelier. One afternoon, a knock came at the cabin door. I opened it to find Paul, a veteran I'd met once during my meetings with the Housing Foundation. He held out a thermos of soup and said, "Heard you've got a knack for fixing things." I smiled. "I used to." "Think you still do," he replied. "Come by sometime. We've got a busted fence, and no one around here knows the difference between a nail and a hammer." That visit turned into another. Then another. Soon I was spending mornings at the veteran shelter, helping repair chairs, replace window panes, even teaching a few of the younger guys how to sand wood properly. They started calling me coach, and someone jokingly asked if I'd ever consider moving in to supervise the property maintenance. I didn't say no. I hadn't felt needed in years. And now, here were men, many broken in ways I understood, who respected every word I offered. Who listened. Who laughed with me. Who saw me. Sometimes, one of them would ask, "Got any family?" And I'd pause. "Had a daughter," I'd say. "Still do, I suppose. Somewhere." No one pried. They understood. Some stories are told by what's not said. And slowly, the silence inside me changed. It became space. Room to breathe. Room to think. Room for something new. One morning, I sat at the shelter's back steps with a cup of coffee, watching the sunrise through the fog. Paul sat next to me, quiet for a while, then said, "You've been through hell. But it didn't kill you." I nodded. "No," I said. "It just showed me who I really was." And that, somehow, was enough. The day the idea came to me, I wasn't looking for it. I was helping Paul and two other veterans fix a broken railing on the second floor of the shelter. The wood was warped, the nails old and rusted. We tore it out and replaced it with fresh pine, sealed and sturdy. As we worked, one of the younger guys, Jared, barely 30, with deep eyes and a twitch in his right hand, looked up and said, "You ever think about building something more permanent, Ed? Like a place that doesn't just fix what's broken but gives folks something new?" I paused, nail halfway in. "What do you mean?" He shrugged. "This place is good, but it's not a home. Not really. Just a roof and some warm food. That's survival. But people like us, we need more than that." His words stayed with me the whole day. That night, back at the cabin, I opened my notebook. The same one I'd used to scribble down my pain, my doubts, my questions when things with Emily began falling apart. This time, I wrote something new. What if Marjorie's house wasn't just the end of something, but the start? The next morning, I drove back into town. Parked outside the Veterans Housing Program office and met with the director, Carla, a tough, kind woman who never minced words. "I want to build something," I told her. "Not just a shelter. A real home. Transitional housing. A place where veterans can live with dignity, learn skills, cook together, grow a garden. A place they can help run themselves." She leaned back in her chair, arms folded. "That's a big ask, Ed. Takes money. Takes land. Takes commitment." "I have all three," I said, sliding the file across the desk. It contained the sale proceeds from my house, every last cent, down to the escrow interest. She opened the folder. Her eyes widened. "You're serious?" I nodded. "Dead serious." Her voice softened. This could change lives." I smiled. "That's the idea." From that moment on, I had purpose again. Not just movement. Momentum. We began sketching blueprints. I met with builders, volunteers, and community leaders. People came out of the woodwork to help, some veterans themselves, others just good souls who believed in the mission. We secured a plot of land near the old train tracks. Not pretty, but full of potential. The city approved our permits faster than expected, and within weeks, the foundation was being poured. Every day, I showed up with my tool belt. Hammer in hand, sawdust in my beard, aching knees and all. I hadn't felt that alive in years. We called it Marjorie's house. When the sign went up on the fence, I stood back and let myself feel it all: grief, pride, love, loss. A home wasn't just a building, I realized. It was a decision. To care. To give. To remember. People began to stop by, curious, skeptical, supportive. A local news outlet ran a piece on the retired man who gave it all away. A few churches offered volunteers. An old high school shop teacher donated tools. Every day felt like a tribute not just to Marjorie, but to everyone who had ever been discarded and deserved more. One day, as I was organizing lumber near the storage shed, I heard someone call out, "Mr. Halstead?" I turned to find a young woman in her 20s standing there. Dark hair, freckles, eyes like her mother. My granddaughter. Emily's daughter. We hadn't seen each other in over a year. She held a small lunch bag in one hand and looked nervous. I saw the article, she said. I didn't know how to reach you. Mom doesn't talk about you much. But I remembered your name. Found you through the shelter directory. I walked slowly toward her, unsure what to expect. She smiled, soft, unsure. I just wanted to say, I'm proud of you. I don't know everything that happened, but I know what kind of man you are. I nodded, heart thudding. You want to come in? She stepped through the gate. We walked around the site. I showed her where the kitchen would be, the shared rooms, the garden we'd plant out back. She listened, asked questions, even offered to help on weekends. Before she left, I handed her a small wooden box. This was your grandmother's, I said. I saved it for someone who'd understand what it meant. She held it carefully. Thank you. And then, something I hadn't felt in a long time settled in my chest. Hope. The house took shape faster than I expected. The walls went up in weeks, the roof after that. We used reclaimed wood from old barns, donated tiles from local suppliers, and insulation paid for by a retired Marine who said he had more pension than patience. The project became something of a miracle, part community effort, part quiet redemption. I was there every day. My hands bled, my knees groaned, but I kept going. And I wasn't alone. Jared became the unofficial foreman, always the first to arrive and the last to leave. Paul oversaw the kitchen layout, insisting the stove be big enough for real stew. Even Carla picked up a hammer now and then, joking that she was getting too old to just sign checks. Soon, it didn't feel like a construction site anymore. It felt like a family reunion, with people I'd only just met, but who treated me with more kindness than some blood relatives ever had. We shared meals in folding chairs around plywood tables. We laughed over bent nails and crooked cuts. We told stories, some war stories, some about childhoods no one else had ever heard. No one wore masks around each other. We didn't have to. One night, as we were locking up the tool shed, Paul clapped me on the back and said, "You know, Ed, you didn't just build a house here. You built a second chance." I didn't respond at first. Just stared at the fresh paint on the porch railings. Marjorie's favorite shade of blue. "You ever think about moving in?" he asked. I looked at him. "You think I'd be welcome?" He laughed. "Ed, you're the reason it exists." That's when it hit me. I didn't just find purpose. I'd found home again. Not made of bricks and memory, but of people who chose each other, not out of obligation, but out of respect. The first few residents moved in before winter, 2 Vietnam vets who'd lost touch with their families, a young Marine dealing with PTSD, and a woman who'd served as a medic and had nowhere to go after a rough divorce. We held a small welcome dinner, just spaghetti, garlic bread, and a lot of laughter. Everyone brought something. Someone played guitar. Jared cried when he saw his room had a small bookshelf already filled. I sat on the porch after everyone had gone to bed, wrapped in a blanket, sipping tea from a chipped mug someone had donated. And I realized something. I didn't miss Emily. I missed the idea of her. The version of her that used to hold my hand and draw smiley faces in her mashed potatoes. But these people, this mission, this was real. This was love that asked for nothing in return. A few days later, my granddaughter came back. She brought a basket of muffins and a binder full of design sketches. "I'm in school for community planning," she said, shyly. I thought, maybe I could help with landscaping. Make it feel more like a neighborhood. I nodded slowly, overwhelmed. "You'd really want to help build this?" She looked up at me, her eyes steady. "I want to build with you." We spent that afternoon walking the grounds. She pointed out where benches could go, where flowers might bloom best, where a little walking trail could wind through the property. She listened to every story I told about her grandmother, some funny, some quiet, all true. Before she left, she looked around at the house and said, "This feels more like home than the place I grew up." I didn't say it aloud, but I felt the same. Over the next few weeks, she came back again and again, sometimes with tools, sometimes with books, sometimes just to sit and talk. She helped plant the first rose bush near the front porch. The same kind her grandmother once adored. And for the first time in a long time, I felt the weight of betrayal loosen its grip. It wasn't that it disappeared. It just mattered less. Because here was someone who reminded me that blood didn't make a family. Loyalty did. Compassion did. Choice did. Emily never came back. I didn't expect her to. But I heard through a neighbor that she and Derek had moved in with his parents. That they were struggling. That maybe they regretted some of their choices. But regret was theirs to hold. Not mine. I had planted something better. And for the first time since I'd lost Marjorie, I felt like she'd be proud of what I'd done. It was a cold afternoon in late February when I saw her again. I had just finished patching some siding at the back of the house. The wind had picked up, and I was brushing sawdust off my coat when I noticed a car pull into the gravel lot at the front. A silver sedan. Familiar. The door opened slowly, and Emily stepped out. She looked different. Smaller, somehow. Her face was pale, her posture stiff. She wasn't wearing makeup. No husband by her side. No ring on her finger. She stood by the gate for a moment, unsure if she was even allowed in. I didn't move at first. Not out of anger. Just to see if she'd turn around. But she didn't. Instead, she walked forward, her eyes scanning the porch, the railings, the sign above the door that read, "Marjorie's house." When she reached the steps, she stopped, clutching a manila envelope to her chest like a shield. "I didn't know where else to go," she said. I nodded. "You found it anyway." She looked around, slowly taking it all in, the flower beds, the welcome mat, the porch swaying slightly in the wind. "It's beautiful," she whispered. "It's honest," I said. She lowered her eyes. "I didn't come to ask for anything. I thought maybe, if you'd let me, I could say what I should have said a long time ago." I stepped aside and gestured to the swing. She sat down, careful, like she didn't feel she had the right. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice cracking. "For everything. For locking you out. For treating you like a burden. I don't know what came over me, Dad. I think I got so wrapped up in my own future, I forgot who built my past. I didn't speak. She kept going. You didn't deserve any of it. You gave me everything. And when I had the chance to give something back, I chose comfort. I chose control. She handed me the envelope. I wrote this months ago. Tried to send it. Never had the guts. It's my statement to withdraw the will contest. I told the lawyer I want nothing. Not a penny. I don't deserve it. I took the envelope but didn't open it. She looked at me, eyes red. I don't expect forgiveness. I just wanted you to know. I remember now. The bedtime stories. The Saturday mornings in the garage. The way you held me when Mom died. She looked down. I forgot who I was. You didn't. We sat in silence for a while. The wind picked up, carrying the smell of fresh cedar and turned soil. Finally, I said, I told your mother once I'd always protect you. That I'd never let you forget where you came from. Emily nodded slowly. I broke that promise, I said. By staying quiet too long. Her lip trembled. You didn't break it. I just stopped listening. Another silence stretched between us, but it wasn't painful. It was honest. Finally, she stood. I don't know if I'll see you again. But I'll carry what you gave me. Not the house. Not the money. The memory. She turned to leave, but I stopped her. Wait. She turned back, surprised. I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out a folded photo, one I'd kept for years. Emily, age 4, sitting on my shoulders in the backyard, both of us smiling so wide you'd think the world had no edges. I don't need this anymore, I said. I remember it well enough. She took it gently, tears brimming again. I hope you find yourself, I said softly. Not for me. For her. I nodded toward the rose bush her grandmother once loved, now blooming again, strong and full beside the porch. Emily looked at it for a long moment, then walked away. She didn't look back. But that time, I did. And I didn't feel anger. Or grief. I felt finality. Not the kind that closes a door with bitterness, but the kind that locks it gently, knowing it was meant to be shut. Inside the house, the dinner bell rang. Spaghetti night again. Laughter filled the kitchen. Plates clinked. Music played low on the radio. And I walked back into where I belonged. Speech balloon, would you have let her back in? Tell us your thoughts in the comments. The grand opening was held on a Sunday. Sunlight poured down like a blessing, and the air was thick with the smell of fresh earth, baked bread, and old paint that hadn't quite faded yet. Folding chairs lined the front lawn. Children ran barefoot between rose bushes. Grown men in button-down shirts stood beside women in borrowed dresses, all with the same look in their eyes. Hope. The ribbon was tied across the porch railing, the same one I'd sanded with Jared 3 weeks earlier. The sign above it now bore hand-carved letters, Marjorie's house, built with heart, held with honor. I stood near the front steps, in my best shirt, Marjorie's locket in my breast pocket. Paul gave a short speech. Carla spoke next. Then, they handed me the scissors. You do the honors, Paul said. I hesitated. Not because I was unsure. But because I wanted to feel every second of this moment. I thought about how this porch once held my sorrow. How it had witnessed my grief, my loneliness, my unraveling. And now, it was a place where others could rebuild. I cut the ribbon. Cheers went up. A few veterans clapped each other on the back. Someone whistled. But I didn't need the noise. I only needed the quiet pride swelling in my chest. Marjorie's house lived again. But it wasn't the same place I'd once shared with a woman and a little girl. It was more. It was the home I didn't know I was building, even when I thought everything was falling apart. Inside, residents showed guests around. The kitchen buzzed with chatter and the smell of lasagna. One of the women, Stacy, a former Navy nurse, sat with two young girls on the couch, braiding their hair and laughing like they'd known each other forever. In the dining room, my granddaughter stood beside the chalkboard schedule she'd designed herself, explaining meal rotations and gardening shifts. She caught my eye and smiled. I raised my hand in a small wave. That smile was enough to carry me through the rest of the day. Later, after the guests had gone and the chairs had been stacked, I sat alone on the porch. The house glowed from within. Music played quietly through the open windows. Marjorie's rose bush danced in the breeze, petals just beginning to curl open. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was holding on to the past. I was passing it forward. That night, I walked the halls. Each room told a story: a man unpacking a suitcase full of medals and regrets, a woman taping a photo of her daughter to the wall, a young couple placing two toothbrushes in a cup, together, for the first time in months. I passed my own room last. I hadn't planned to live here permanently, but somehow I never left. The bed was modest. The nightstand held a photo of Marjorie. A new notebook sat beside it, half full already. I opened the window before I lay down, listening to the soft hum of life just outside. And I spoke, as I often did, to the woman who never got to see this with her own eyes. "We did it, love," I whispered. "We gave them what we gave each other, safe walls, steady love, and a place where no one gets locked out in the rain." I closed my eyes. For once, I wasn't waiting for anything. Not forgiveness. Not resolution. Not a knock at the door. Because the right people were already here. The family I chose. And the life I rebuilt.